Hi, everyone. This is your host, Teena, on the podcast called Fraudcraft, Fraud Syndicates, Fraud Schemes, Fraud Tech. Today we have Don Marshall. We'll cover his history, but first I'd like to say a few things because I have some mad respect for this young man. He turned the California work comp fraud investigation industry upside down in a good way. He's known by everyone who's anyone by first name only. He is the most dynamic leader in the SIU insurance industry in the nation. Don, you've had the most impact on investigators like me who also wanted to bring in change and innovation to the commercial insurance fraud industry. And like Tom Brady and Tony Robbins say, consistency is king. You have been the most consistent, productive, innovative change agent our industry has ever seen. I don't know how you do it, but I think we're going to get into your secrets today. You've got to tell us how you've managed all of this. And not only have you been a great angel disruptor in the fraud realm, but a visionary tactical leader. And today, I want to cover all your secrets. I remember the first time I heard you speak. We were in some law enforcement investigator conference, I think in the Inland Empire. And there were probably about 1,000 or 2,000 people in the audience. I think it was for CDI, like Joint Task Force conference. And I was sitting way in the back with the other well-known hoodlums. And I just remember how you had everybody stone cold silent. You had everybody captivated. And then I remember when you opened up with most people in the industry don't know where to put the apostrophe in workers' comp. And you had me at apostrophe because I had just moved from Texas where they put the apostrophe before the S in workers' comp. And then I get to California and everybody's putting the S after workers' comp. And that really messed me up. So maybe you can dispel the myth on that one. But you come across as a very strong, pleasantly arrogant in the best way ever, highly articulate of all the facets of the insurance industry and of the fraud business of it all. And I was just always blown away at your high level effectiveness in both of those realms. And then I came to know you, and you're a great human, very personable, very sociable, incredibly generous with your knowledge. And Don, the industry is suffering a big hole with your recent retirement. So I'd like to start us off with you telling us about your historic professional journey so someone who wants to put on your shoes one day will know what it takes.
Well, let me give them nice shoes. Regarding my past, my history, I actually go back in my law enforcement to when I was 15 years old. I joined the Explorer program. I knew then that I wanted to get into law enforcement. And I was very fortunate. It was a Newark police department. So it was a smaller department. So they did spend time with those of us who aspired to become a law enforcement officer at some point. I became a police cadet when I became of age. I was a reserve officer for a number of years until I finally tested for the city next door, Fremont. And I became a police officer in Fremont in 1976. My goodness, that 50 years is coming up. That's scary. Yeah, so 1976. I worked patrol and traffic and other assignments until I was finally had the opportunity to be assigned to the detective division, working burglary at first. Around the same time I was working burglary, I had a back surgery due to an injury that occurred while I was on the street. That actually led to my medical retirement from law enforcement a few years later. I moved into white collar crime and worked various type of checks, credit cards, embezzlement, internal thefts. And that really where I kind of got a touch of this thing called fraud.
Yeah.
But not really. It's interesting. I will say this now, and I feel very comfortable saying it, is I became a much better investigator after I left police work than I ever was as a police detective. And
Yep.
there's reasons, and hopefully I'll remember to go into them. So I did that, went into recruiting for a very short period of time. I was in background recruiting and personnel at Fremont until they finally kind of opened the door for me. I couldn't stay forever because I had back surgery. I could never return to the street. I was contacted by a local private investigator, a gentleman who was an ex-Oakland police officer, and he offered me work, which I needed. And one of the things when I first was going out, and I'm glad he was there, because one of the first things, and we may talk about this later when we talk about law enforcement officers wanting to enter the insurance industry, and that is there is no lack of retired police officers in this world. And similarly, I'm a cop doesn't work
Yeah.
because apparently everybody At least every time I went for a job, everybody was a cop. And so not sure how much that helped, but what definitely helped was me becoming working as a private investigator. I later got my license. In fact, I just renewed it this week.
Oh, nice.
Although I can't use it. If the state's watching, I know I sent you the letter. I can't use my license, but I did renew it. But that's when that's okay. And I started doing really insurance work at that point. And my first couple cases were actually property cases. Unlike what I found later was I worked the case to conclusion. I learned then that many of the investigators were working a case just enough. And I learned early on, and it's kind of against my personality anyway, enough's never good enough. And so I worked these up, and the Department of Insurance was now again, we're talking 1988. The Department of Insurance existed, the fraud division. It was very small, very focused in what they were investigating. And so they weren't really interested in my property cases. That's not a jab. It's just the way it was because they only had so many investigators. So I learned to take it to law enforcement. And as a result, I was only worked for the private investigator for about 9 or 10 months and had a number of arrests of people that were cheating the system. What's interesting is since then, it's just as hard now to have a property arrest for somebody committing property insurance fraud, again, because of manpower and funding. But I was pretty successful at that.
The big question always is, Don, is there's no books out there on how to investigate insurance fraud. So how did you develop your expertise?
That's a good lead in. For us not practicing, that's an excellent lead in. Because just as I was ending my career as a private investigator, I received a couple assignments in the auto side to look at medical clinics. Now, probably like you, when you were in law enforcement and in the military, medical clinic's a medical clinic.
Yep.
They're all over the place. What's the big deal? But I won't give the name of the clinic, but it was on Mission Street in San Francisco. I remember walking inside and it was packed. There were a lot of people around. I walked up to the counter and I could see the lady behind the counter. She was using a typewriter. For those of you who don't know, when this is over, go ahead and Google what typewriter is. You'll have a chance to see what those were. She was typing out a bill to an insurance company. And she wasn't reading off medical notes. She was reading off somebody else's bill. And she was typing in directly off the bill, one bill to the other. I could see it was a different person. In fact, it was a different insurance company. And so I was never in the FBI, but I think even the FBI calls that a clue. And at that moment, I recognized the need to dig deeper into these things called medical clinics. Very quickly, and again, you're right, there were no books. I created by myself a system and a template for completing clinic inspections. Those words were really big in the early 90s, clinic inspections. And I was doing clinic inspections about the end of 1988. In 89, I got a job for about 9 months doing credit card fraud. So that's a gap. I was still doing fraud investigations, but away from insurance. But even in that short period of time when I was doing clinic inspections, as I found out later, those reports were circulated all over the state. I guess there were meetings, people were going in and saying, look at this. And they were very detailed reports, ownership, control. I was going into the back rooms with permission. That was the whole idea of a clinic inspection is, hey, look, the insurance company just wants to make sure, look, if you're billing for something, you really have the equipment. Is that something you can do? And back then, they were very willing to give me a tour.
Wow.
So when I went back and looked at a hot pack heater, for example, and I opened it and it was crusty inside and cold. So obviously it wasn't even operational. I remember seeing an x-ray machine with a crack running through the screen, the lens of the x-ray machine. I'm thinking, I don't know, maybe that's not a good idea. And I had a chance to interview the chiropractors and or the medical doctors. And by doing that, I started to get a good feel for what a medical clinic is supposed to look like and what it really doesn't. And these were mills. And so
And what's a mill?
Those reports went everywhere. Absolutely. You've been there. I was going to mention this later, but I'll mention it now. A mill is any clinic that exists to churn patients, to roll as many patients through in a short period of time so they can get maximum billing with minimal time spent with the patients.
Do they still get the medical care that they're supposed to get?
I don't know. I wasn't back there when they were getting it.
This is where we drink.
Right? Yeah. I wasn't back there. I can't say they weren't. I can tell you that one of my investigators and I went to a clinic not that long, well, a couple of years ago, I guess now, in Fresno. And there were no fewer than 150 people. The lobby was completely packed. All the chairs were full. Outside, it was kind of like a mini professional center. Most of the businesses were out of business. People were sitting on curbs, on planters, and you walk around, they all had workers' comp papers. from various insurance companies. There was a security guard there, and asked him, I said, well, what's going on? And he goes, this is a quiet day.
Wow.
There's normally double the number of people here. So I went into the clinic hoping to do a clinic inspection. By this point, clinics were wising up that when we were going inside, we weren't exactly novices trying to figure out what was going on. We were
Right.
finding evidence to ultimately close the clinic, hopefully. But what I did notice was there were only about 4 exam rooms. And so I sat out and I timed the people, and most people that went into the back room were only in there for 5 to 7 minutes and they were back out. And that was constant. It was a churning of patients. So I will let the listener decide whether or not that's sufficient time to perform appropriate medical care for an injured worker. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a chiropractor. I'm just a person who's looking at a set of circumstances going, I don't know. I'm not sure I'm going for that.
Right.
So that's what a mill is. Now, I didn't do this alone. I remember walking out of one clinic in San Francisco and there were 2 guys in a car. I thought they were detectives because they were in a Ford Fairlane and they sure looked like detectives, and they worked for a major insurance carrier. And they brought me to their office in San Francisco. This gentleman happens to have passed away a number of years ago, but he was one of the gods. In the Bay Area, there were some people that were the gods of insurance fraud, record keeping and insurance fraud investigations. And he was one of them. And we spent the rest of the afternoon, by the way, not billable time. I was a private investigator. That wasn't billable time. That was a freebie. And I spent the rest of the afternoon learning things like the corporate practice of medicine.
Mm.
Who can own a clinic, who can run a clinic, who controls it, where you find those records, how you prove or disprove the ownership. And I learned how it ties. Now, again, this was auto fraud. It was not workers' comp. It was tied to auto fraud. And so I did some more of those, came back into the industry in a desk position, but was able to direct private investigators. Now, as far as going to lead into is I got this job, took it over for a good friend of mine who basically wanted to get out of the SIU world. And I had done some of the clinic inspections already for that company. So they were already quite aware of that, plus others, property cases, auto. So they were already aware of if I was any good.
Right.
And they reached out to me to come on board. And one of the first PI bills I reviewed, because they didn't have external investigators. All the investigations were done by private investigators. The very first bill I opened the envelope, and here was the bill, and here was a report. And in that report was my clinic inspection report for the clinic. Not a retype, not a summary of what I had written. It was my exact report. And they were billing $300 for that report. I didn't pay that bill. I know that might come as a shock. I had a very nice talk. I kept using the PI because I knew him. I know how good he was. He just saw a way to cut corners. I have no idea how many of my reports made it to other insurance companies. I know they made it to other insurance companies because that's kind of how I became known
Right.
early on, is the work I did in medical.
Now, pausing here because I think people don't understand. You're really talking about a lot of work that goes into clinic inspections. There's a lot of stress. There's a lot of physical work. There's a lot of mental work. There's a lot of research that you probably did before doing the clinic inspections. Anything that you were able to take from your law enforcement experience with you on the street that served you out there?
What I could take from law enforcement, no question, is the ability to talk to people
Mm-hmm.
and the ability to know when they're lying to you. Now, that's not everybody. I mean, everybody. You don't have to be a cop to do that, but you develop a street sense. I was only a police officer for 12 years, that's baby, right? Nothing to be impressed about at all. I wish I could have finished my career. I really do. I had no intention of leaving. The chief at the time was very nice. He said, if there was any way I could keep you, I would. But, you can't treat one injured person different than another. You
Right.
have to be fair. So that's what I took away. Like I said earlier, I was a much better investigator after law enforcement.
Mm.
But the tools I used, I think the most important tool I used was a tool of talk.
Yep.
Because you talk to almost any police officer. I mean, I used to be proud of myself that everybody confessed. Not everybody, but about 98% of the people confessed.
Right.
And I was pretty proud of myself till I found out that's pretty normal in law enforcement. And after a while, you develop a system where the
Right.
people pretty much confess. No games, no trickery. You build a rapport, you talk to them, and you give them an opportunity
Yep.
to tell you. And so those are the skills that I think other people can have. But I think as a police officer, you hone those skills. You become much better at it. And so that's the other thing it led me to while I was still doing auto, and then I'll start talking about workers' comp, because by this time I'm learning about staged accidents. Back when I was a private investigator, I did start working. Again, I'd love to mention his name. He's no longer with the Department of Insurance. He's retired. One of the best investigators I've ever known. We worked another case together later on. Rich Hong was an amazing investigator. And I stumbled into an undercover operation. I got the lady who was running the clinic to give me a full recorded statement about these people that were bringing patients in that worked in the insurance industry. She was aware they were being scammed by the insurance, and I stumbled into it.
Wow.
And the work I was doing was for the company that was running the undercover. That was the last case I got for them, fortunately.
Oh,
They
that is
didn't
cool.
appreciate me screwing up their work. I didn't know I didn't know I did it. I got the lady to talk to me. It took me a while, but she finally opened up, and Sean was amazing. We worked another case later in workers' comp, which I could talk about later, because it has to do with internal theft, which is a big deal in
I
workers'
love
comp.
that you talk about ruining undercover operations, because that's our hazard, right? When I was working one of the big fraud syndicates down in San Diego, my director, Mike, kept getting phone calls from the feds and saying, "Hey, can you please ask Teena to, don't interview that person. She's walking into the, ex so and so's house right now. Can you have her turn around and walk back out? Or, is that Teena on the street over there?" And I mean, we get that a lot, the hazards.
And I'm going to go ahead and name one other person,
Yeah.
because he was one of my mentors. His name's Pete Brown. Pete Brown is now retired.
Ah.
He worked his own PI company for a number of years. He was my supervisor at one of the companies I worked for.
Right.
And Pete and I, again, this is the auto days, we made a videotape on how to do clinic inspections. Okay, folks, a videotape, again, Google it when you get a chance. You'll learn what videotape is. And it was professionally done. My company allowed us to rent what's called a 3-chip camera. It was a Sony. It was a professional grade camera. And Pete and I and an attorney, Dave McDowell, just an amazing attorney who's semi-retired now. I believe he's living in Hawaii.
Ah.
I shouldn't say that for sure, but I believe he is. And then a chiropractor who I can't even remember his name. And we videotaped step by step how to identify which clinics to look at, the steps to do the inspection, what to look for, the corporate records that were needed. Now think about this. Corporate records early on were not that easy to come across.
Right.
I mean, we didn't have the internet. And so it's not that we couldn't get it, but it wasn't quite as easy. For those of you who are familiar with the system called the index that has prior injuries, prior losses, prior auto, when I started this started in this business, you had to go to San Francisco and go through 3x5 pieces of paper. Nothing was computerized. And you had to go through, and a lot of it had not even been filed yet. There were boxes and boxes of copies. People would fill these out by hand and then send them in. So that was quite different then, but we could still do it. We could still find out information. So that videotape, I think I still have a copy somewhere. I watched it again. It's way too boring in my mind to watch, but did that. And that's the kind of input into the industry that I guess started getting my name out there, and how I ended up at a workers' comp carrier in the early 90s. About 1993 is when I went into my first work comp carrier.
And I don't think you mentioned that those are paper files back then too, that you had to like root through,
Yeah,
read medical reports, written medical reports.
absolutely. Go to the county and go through county records at the recorder's office or in the clerk's office. Well, yeah, those were the days.
You didn't have a
Computers.
cell phone to pick up and call someone for help, or
Actually, believe it or not, my wife felt bad enough for me. I actually had a cell phone in 1988.
bless her heart.
Yeah,
You're
it was about the
spoiled.
size of it was about the size of the car I was driving.
Was that one of those bag
Oh,
phones?
yeah, bad one. Yeah, absolutely. But they worked. Even back then, they worked. It was a little different. But that's what got me into workers' comp. So I still remember this in workers' comp because this is one of my favorite stories. I came into the office. They hired me. That's actually the first time I became a manager. Was there. I managed Northern California for this company. I remember I'm kind of excitable sometimes. When I talk about things I like doing, I get excited. And so had everybody from all the claims examiners, attorneys, everybody else from the branch come in, and I gave my spiel that, there's stuff going out there that you need to know about, and we can find for you. And we can use this information to maybe bring criminal charges, but maybe help you defeat a claim, defeat a portion of a claim, something like that. Da, 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 da. And I talked about clinic inspections, and I talked about illegal medical clinics.
And they were so excited, weren't they?
Once they woke up, I think so. No, I kept their attention. But one of the attorneys came into my office after that and said, closed the door, and sat down and said, let me explain something to you. This is comp. That stuff doesn't work.
Really? Why?
Yep. It might work in auto because comp doesn't care. Workers' comp, you're asking things where comp doesn't care. And
Can
I
you
said,
push
yeah.
down on that? Because I think that needs to be said.
Well, don't forget, this is 1993.
Mhm.
I don't know. Let's see, you were in high school, right?
But I'm just getting a sense that not much has changed.
Well, so this one attorney, he tells me that. I said, okay, I consider that a challenge, right? So I immediately went out and started asking claims examiners who problem doctors were. And there's this one was in Oakland, so it was close. And so I got in my car and went down and did a clinic inspection and did the follow-up, did the report. That clinic was not owned by the doctor who was working there. It was owned by a non-doctor. And for those of you who are unaware, the corporate practice of medicine in California states that a medical clinic must be owned, 51% of the ownership must be a medical doctor, the medical doctor who controls the activity in the clinic. And the other 49%, there's a whole list of people that can be in the ownership, but they can only be in the ownership. They can't be in the control of the facility. That's key. I mean, that's a real simplified version of one aspect. Also in workers' compensation, if you don't know about the Continental decision, the Continental decision says that if you find a situation where the clinic is illegal, their bills are non-existent. And it's retroactive. I mean, they can't fix it. It's unfixable. They can't go in and say, oh, we're sorry, we'll fix it. It's unfixable. The Continental decision deals with the fictitious name permit that a doctor applies for the clinic that he is opening and controlling. So I did this. I went in, found this information, put it together, found the claim. I went back to the attorney and said, here are 12 pages of questions. I want you to depose the doctor, and I want you to ask the questions in this order. And he goes, well, I'm not sure. No, in this order. There's method to why I'm doing this. There's lead-in questions you have to ask, and you have to do it in order. So he sat down and he goes, it's 12 pages long. Another fallacy. I've heard this from more than one attorney. Well, you can only depose a doctor for about 2 hours. No, you depose a doctor until the deposition is over. There's no 2-hour maximum. But anyway, moving off, a little tangent.
That reminds me of one of the chiropractors in a fraud syndicate scheme where I had my attorney with me. We did a video deposition. And the chiropractor walks in and he goes, I'm just going to plead the fifth to every question. So we might as well just go home. And so my defense counsel, he goes, well, let me just get started. And he starts asking him questions. And the chiropractor goes, plead the fifth, plead the fifth, plead the fifth. So my attorney goes, okay, well, let's go home. And I literally pulled him by the ear and I said, get back in there. You're going to ask every single question. Let him plead the fifth, but you've got to get those questions on record.
That's right.
So we sat there for 3 hours. Hearing I plead the fifth.
Yeah, I've had those. I've had depositions where they refuse to talk until I leave the room. How's that? True story. I've had doctors refuse to testify while I'm in the room. And then when they finally my attorney explains I'm not leaving, then when I try and whisper a question, anyway. Okay, so we set this doctor's deposition. We show up and he shows up with 5 attorneys, including 2 criminal defense attorneys. This is for a deposition over a single claimant for medical records. That's it. And the defense attorney is extremely well known in the Bay Area, said, let me tell you how this is going to work. Dr. So-and-so is not going to participate in this deposition at all. There will be no questions asked. There will be no answers. I have for you here a document signed by the doctor that I have completed that he will never again see any patients from your company, ever. And he is dissolving the clinic. And also, he is giving you a check in the amount of whatever it was for all the bills he has ever sent your company. Thank you very much. Have a nice day. After it was over, the attorney who told me this doesn't work looked at me and went, holy crap. This works.
Great win.
Yes, it does. Yes, it does work. But it doesn't work by guess or by golly. It works because, as you pointed out, a lot of work goes into the preparation. And a lot of people were trying to do the investigation over the phone. Again, I'm going on a tangent here because I feel really strongly about this. Yeah. There has been a movement in the country to bring investigations in-house. Not in-house, inside. They call them desk investigators. And there is a place. There's absolutely a place for desk investigators, no question. But to believe that you can be successful in this business and not go into the field, you're mistaken. In my humble opinion, you can't do it. You have to go out into the field. And in this case, they had this video of this guy who was completely paralyzed on the right side of his body. Sad story, except for the videotape that had him hunking a football 63 times with that paralyzed right arm to his kids out by his house. But when they took it to the doctors wouldn't change their opinion, which is absurd. And so I went to the doctors, sat down with them, and basically had, do you really want to get on the stand and say this? Particularly if, I'm not saying they will be, especially in 93, if charges are going to be filed and you're going to get on the stand and the jury's going to see that videotape and you're going to say, yeah, everybody with a stroke can do that with their with their paralyzed right. Anyway, he gave me a recorded statement and basically blew the claim out of the DA at the time, Alice Sprague, who's now long retired. She took the case. It wasn't perfect. There's no such thing as a perfect criminal case. I don't care. Even murder cases aren't perfect unless you get them on videotape and they confess. But it was a good case, and he ended up pleading guilty. Really, the postscript that we'll talk about this more either in this talk or a future talk is the workers' comp judge, after the conviction, said, I don't see the fraud, and he gave him a full award. One of the problems in our system is the system. And I go into more detail maybe later on. But now we reconned it. Recon is like an appeal at the workers' comp, and we ended up having the award throw. Actually, they gave up, basically. They quit fighting.
Is it the failure? Was it the failure on your side that you didn't show the fraud? Or is it just a judge who just didn't understand fraud or blatantly didn't want to deal with it?
I don't know.
Mhm.
I do know that he went to work for the applicant attorney's firm shortly after that decision. I'm
Sorry,
serious.
but I think you answered the question.
I'm serious. No, I can't say that I can't say that. Do you see all those books back there?
Yeah. Yeah.
Not one of them deals with leadership. Oh, a good friend of mine where I live here is an author, Bruce Borges, and those are a lot of his books. Let me give you the very most important management lesson I received was from my wife. After I started for the first time managing people, and I managed a pretty good size team. It wasn't national at that point. I later, as vice president, it was national. It was a region, and I'd been there a while. And I was talking about, we were just talking about things, and she goes, "Don, you can't try to be their friend. Get that out of your mind." And she could see that's what I was trying to do. I was just trying not to upset the apple cart, And she goes, "Look, it doesn't mean be a jerk, but you can't work as a manager and hope that they become your friend, or they might be friends with you."
Right.
But those decisions can't be based on, I sure want them to like me. Everybody wants people to like them, right? Trust me, over the years, there's a lot of people that used to work for me. They don't like me, I'm
Right.
sure. But there's others that used to work for me that knew why something happened. And sometimes it was just a reduction in force.
What would you say to people who would want to come work for you and people are applying to be a special investigator on your team? What are you looking for?
Fire, right? Looking for that fire. I talked earlier about the difference between when I was a cop and later became a insurance fraud investigator. I was an all right officer. I was an all right detective. I wouldn't put myself at the level of the people I worked with. There were detectives in the division. To this day, I'm in awe of their abilities, particularly when it came to interview skills. Once you've taken 16, 18, 40 burglary reports, it becomes rote. It becomes, okay, another burglary report. Where were you? What happened? What was stolen? How'd they get in? Dust for fingerprints. Have a nice day. Move on. And it becomes kind of checkbox. And the unfortunate reality is I've learned over the years that there are investigators, not that work for me, but good investigators, nice people, but they have that checkbox mentality. I got to do this. I have to do this. I've done this. I've done this. Finished.
Is that back when you were talking about how it drove you nuts where some investigators just wanted to investigate enough?
Well, that's it. That's exactly it.
Okay.
If you go back, and again, probably could do a whole thing about the commission. One of the biggest complaints by prosecutors is and Department of Insurance, by the way, is the quality of the fraud referrals. Over the years, the Department of Insurance has put new regulations, new rules, new ways in place to try and get more details in the fraud referrals. And the reality is a lot of times, and I've never read them. Even on a commission, we're not privy to reading fraud referrals from my company. Well, obviously Mike can do my companies, but other people's companies, we're not privy to that. We don't get to read that. We take the word of the DAs, but I've kind of seen some narratives over the years, and it would be something like, the person claims to have a bad back, and we have video of them riding a bicycle. Okay. And that's it. Do it. Do the investigation. Go for it. Well, what did you do? Well, I hired a PI. He got video, and I put all the paperwork together and gave it to you. Here, run with it. That's what I'm not looking for that, right? What I'm looking for, I haven't had an investigator one time tell me Don, can you give me a checklist of what I need to do? And I went, no, I'm not going to do that. I want you to go out and do what you need to do. I need you to go out and on your own, find out what's happening, why, and how you can prove it. And so, we talked about law enforcement and people coming from law enforcement in the SIU community. I used to keep it really short and simple. I used to say that we would refer to RIP. Have you ever heard the term RIP as it applies to police officers coming into the insurance industry as SIU?
Tell us.
Retired in place.
Retired in place.
Yeah, they've got their pension, but they've got 2 kids to put through college. So they get a job in the insurance. Now, this is not all of them, of course not. There's
Right.
some excellent examples. I could go on the number of people, former law enforcement, that are amazing, much better than me, investigators in this world, in this thing called workers' comp, I think. And many of them are former law enforcement. You asked me earlier, the question was, who would you hire? How do you find the person to hire? I will tell you that some of the most successful investigators came from the claims floor, not from law enforcement.
Oh, it's interesting.
Number one, we already knew they were good. In fact, I've upset more than one senior manager for stealing somebody from claims into SIU. If there's something that somebody in law enforcement can do to prepare themselves is to learn the industry. There's a gentleman, I'm going to go ahead and use his name. I don't think he'll mind, Bill Randall.
Yeah.
And Bill Randall, believe it was him who said, in his mind, a person should be an adjuster/examiner for a period of time before they come into SIU.
Mhm.
So they understand this system
Yeah.
that they're investigating, because there are little bits and pieces of this system that are unusual,
Mhm.
not normal, and in many cases, not logical.
About women in the industry, I really want to key in on some examples of when you saw a woman do a really great job.
All the friggin' time. I've been very fortunate with former, basically stealing examiners, top producers.
Mhm.
However, there are law enforcement that have done an amazing job that have come on board. My old company, they picked up somebody from law enforcement and she's doing an amazing job.
Oh, very nice.
But again, she understood, number one, she knew the system, but more importantly, she had a desire to do the best.
Yes.
Not enough, always more than enough. My referrals and the referrals of people who have worked for me are seldom, if ever, contained within the 4,500 characters allowed on a California state fraud referral. They're more like 22 pages
Wow.
because that's what an investigation looks like. A completed investigation looks like. Now, there's other companies that do the same thing. There are some PI companies that do an amazing job
Mhm.
as contract SIUs. And so that's what I'm looking for, is I'm looking for somebody who's not looking for a job.
Right.
What was that old Army, looking for a job, I'm looking for an adventure or something like that? It was some commercial from years ago. That's really it. I'm not looking for somebody who wants a job. I need somebody who looks at this and says, I am going to be the best at this. With all due respect, I'll be better at this than you when this is over. Now, the reality is people coming into this business, Teena, and you will agree that the number of people who have specialized in medical fraud or
Mhm.
legal fraud is tiny.
Yeah.
It is a tiny number. My medical fraud history, I sent you my ridiculously long CV. And for years, I did classes for the National Healthcare Anti-Fraud Association of every type of medical fraud out there. And so in the healthcare world, there's a number of investigators that understand things like ownership, control, proper coding. We don't call it upcoding, proper coding. What constitutes fraud in a bill. In our workers' comp world, we have done, in my opinion, a poor job
Mm.
at expanding that skill set into more investigators. Now, in fairness, a lot of the investigators I've talked to have no desire to go to that level,
Yeah.
because I don't need to tell you, the healthcare and legal investigations are extremely complicated.
Yeah.
And you can see that by some of the results in trial, right?
Right.
They're so convoluted that even juries and judges get confused.
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily they didn't do what they said they were doing. It's just that it overwhelmed them. So if it
Absolutely.
overwhelms them after it's done, think about the person who's doing it and how overwhelmed they can become.
I was in a trial in Southern California, and on trial was an attorney, an applicant attorney in workers' comp. And the judge said publicly in front of everybody, he goes, I don't understand this. I don't understand why we're here. I don't understand why we're here on an issue of business referrals to another provider from this attorney.
Yeah.
He just didn't get the fraud and didn't get, the motivating factor and the kickbacks and all that stuff. The judge just saw it as, I've got an attorney in front of me who needs services, and he refers those services out to other service providers, and where's the fraud?
Just look how lucky we are that no judge has ever been involved in workers' comp fraud.
Didn't one just get charged the other day?
I was being smart, but no, he didn't get charged. He pled guilty. He pled guilty and was a former prosecutor.
Yeah,
And that should tell your listeners, we can sit and talk till we're blue in the face how big the problem is. That should be the exclamation point. That
yes,
should be the end of the paragraph. If a former prosecutor turned judge sees how much money can be stolen in the workers' comp system, then we've got a significant problem that we're probably only touching the edge of.
right. I wanna take you back on the street when you're dealing one-on-one with the fraudster providers, bad doctors, bad attorneys, people in the clinic. Can you talk about what you saw, the personalities?
There were two types, basically. There was the one personality that was the hardest to get through to, and that was the one who knew exactly what they were doing and had no intention of changing or providing you any information at all that would help you build a case. Almost arrogant, don't come in here and with your red tie and start asking me questions. So it was almost an arrogant. The other ones you could tell were sheep. Going back to being in the field, I remember we worked a case and one of the peripheral physicians of this organization was really involved. And we saw her a number of times. I know I'm not going to give you the name, but if offline, you would know exactly what I'm talking about. If there was I can't say criminal, if there was what appeared to be a mill or questionable operation, she was often involved.
Did she
And
have a couple of new Ferraris in her garage?
no, that's somebody else.
Was that with the other one?
No, that's somebody else.
I thought I knew where you were going with that
No,
one.
but no. But so myself and then one investigator, and I did this all the time, investigative technique 101 is I waited outside the clinic because by this time we had done some recon. We knew what she looked like. When she got there, I basically followed her right in and said, we need to talk about this stuff going on. And she folded, immediately gave me a full recorded statement, everything, the fraud, everything else. I think that's the other personality is I'm just along for the ride.
Mhm.
And now that you're getting close, I'm going to dump on the person who's running it. Commonly referred to as flipping them. Usually you have to wait till it gets to criminal to flip. But she gave us a full recorded statement that helped tie the case together. In fact, shortly thereafter, the law firm we had retained deposed her.
Oh, wow.
And she didn't change her story. So those are the personalities I normally see as either arrogant or giving up. The most recent case I had involved the other. You and I over the years have talked about law firms that may or may not, may or may not purchase claimants from organizations who
Right.
are out there recruiting to bring people in. Okay. But the other one, and you're fully aware of this, are the non-attorneys who run their own law office.
Oh, that drives me nuts. So many now.
Well, because you don't have to be an attorney in the work comp system. For those of you who didn't know, you don't have to be an attorney to be in the work comp system. You don't have to be a paralegal to
Yeah.
represent somebody at the board.
And what's driving me nuts is the applicant attorneys can charge what they charge. They're hitting the settlements, the claimants for 20% of their benefits, and they're using non-attorneys.
Yeah.
Run everything. The claimant never has any interaction whatsoever with a real attorney.
Well, the other thing is a lot of time these people buy a law firm's name or an attorney's name. And when we talked about this before, the very large organization that you broke and I had worked also from
Mhm.
not together because we don't do that. That's a separate discussion altogether. How come
We
one of
didn't
the
even know
reasons
each other at the time, I don't think, until later, until we
it was
really got
later.
into the
It was
yeah,
later.
yeah.
I went to a law firm and the attorney goes, if this is workers' comp, it's not me, it's the guy over there. And this guy over there was the guy who gave me the name and the address and phone number of the capping operation. Just caught him by surprise. Not unlike you, Teena. I know that's one of your techniques, and it's been my technique forever. Is cold calls work much better than trying to make an appointment. You try to make an appointment, you'll never see the person. You'll never get the appointment.
Benefits from my years as being a vice and narc, cold calls.
Cold calls, knock and talk, right? Knock and
Knock
talk.
and talk, exactly.
So anyway, those are what I deal with mostly. But the case I had was this was a situation where a gentleman in the Valley had gone through a number of attorneys. He have an attorney's name, they get tired of it, they get out of it. And he was on his next attorney, and the attorney lived really close to me. And so I went to there and left my card on his door, give me a call. And he gave me a call on a Sunday night. And I said, I think you know why I'm calling. That's all I said. I think you know why I'm calling. And he goes, yep, and I'm getting out of it right now. I'm not going to get involved in this anymore. Thank you very much for dropping by. And the very next day, the guy running his own little law firm, who was very successful and popular, by the way, very successful non-attorney, he called me to say he's getting out of the business too, which he did. He got out of the business, went into something else. That's the other example. It kind of ties in with the one that gave me the recorded statement. I know I'm doing something wrong. You caught me. Time to move on.
Yes.
And by the way, yes, I did a referral. No, it didn't.
It's funny because when I started hitting the fraud syndicates and started talking to them directly, the first thing I realized is how they really appreciated operating in the dark. And the minute you cop knock them, they, a lot of them truly do go away. They're like, oh, shoot, you caught me. I don't want anything more of this. I'm just going to disappear. And that kind of ties back into you saying that you need to get out in the field because you can't do that from a phone because they're not going to call you back. And direct dealing with these fraudsters is very effective, like you say.
The best example I can give of going into the field is I wasn't going into the field, but I had a really good private investigator. I had him check 10 clinics in the Los Angeles region that we were receiving bills from. None of them existed. They were the closed buildings or empty lots. But if you would have called, you would have got somebody on the phone and it would have sounded just like a regular medical clinic, wherever they were operating out of, some apartment, some back room. Yeah. And so cold calls, developing informants.
Yeah.
I mean, I had people, even in the auto days, I had people who would call me and tell me I had built a rapport with them and they would tell me where there had been a staged accident, told me where it occurred and where to get the police report.
Oh, wow.
So developing informants, that's not just for law enforcement.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and you're careful. You have to be, you don't have a gun or a badge.
Right.
And so you have to be careful that what you're dealing with, that you're not getting set up.
Right.
Because that still could happen.
Friends, I'm so excited that you are here with us today. I hope that this information gave you valuable insight. I believe in you, your ability to have a stellar professional career, and to protect yourself from being prey to fraud syndicates. Everyone, come see us on the next episode. We'll be waiting for you. And hey, thank you for hitting subscribe. It's free. It's the best way to continue your fraud schemes, education, and awareness. Thank you for hitting like on the videos. Thank you for donating to our podcast. Money's earned. Go to no-kill animal shelters because, it's cool to be kind, y'all.